Hey guys, it's me, Gavin. Over the past couple of months, I've gotten into the Metal Gear Solid series, and have, at the point of writing this, just 100%ed both Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain. It's been a great time, truly. But there's something that I've thought about since as early as the first game. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this because of the title, but I might as well make it clear. What exactly does the Tactical Espionage Action tagline even mean? It's all over the games. We'll get to you. But as far as I can tell from our cursory Google search, there's no confirmation of what it actually means. It's just a cool sounding header that vaguely describes the whole series. But I didn't get to where I am in life by not being pedantic and over-analytical, so today I actually want to try and answer the question, what the hell is a tactical espionage action? Before we get into it, you should know I'm only going to be covering the main Metal Gear pentology. I played a little bit of Peace Walker and Dip because it's very transparently just MGS for a portable system. I played even less of Portable Ops because it's even more transparently just MGS for a portable system, and because it plays like ass. I didn't play the Twin Snakes because I'm not that stupid, and I didn't play the MSX games because I promise you I'm not that stupid. Back on track, let's try a very Occam's razor approach to the tagline. Is Metal Gear a tactical, espionage, and action game? I know that might sound like a simple answer to people who've played the games, but really think about how well each of those words fit them. We're going to talk about how much each game is tactical and that they require planning from players, how much espionage they require, which I'm just going to substitute with stealth in general since the literal definition of espionage isn't really a gameplay thing, and how well they fit action, which I doubt I have to explain. Let's start at the beginning, the one people actually played, and take it from the top. Starting with MGS1, is it tactical? Mostly. The Soliton radar might be a tad too good, but it allows the player to plan ahead for most of the room. And MGS1 was back when the traps in the series were a little less than clear, and the first person mode was cumbersome, so planning ahead is a pretty valuable skill here. Unfortunately, that's about where the tactics end. MGS1 is the one game in the series that's probably best known for stuffing your hammer space with a bunch of shit, and while this might give the illusion of tactics, a whole lot of these items come down to using them as they appear useful, with very little forward thinking needed. Hey Snake, make sure you grab that rope because you're gonna need it in like 3 minutes. Hey Snake, do you like Stinger missiles? Because I know a certain insecure Brit who loves them twice as much. MGS1 leans way harder into the espionage and action part of the tagline, mostly because your punishment for not being good at espionage is having to deal with the terrible action. You can really tell MGS1's a stealth game by the fact that getting seen is pretty brutal. All the guards know where you are, they respawn infinitely, and since combat controls are so unintuitive and your resources are limited, you're disincentivized from engaging in gunfights. So yeah, I'd definitely say MGS1 fits the bill for espionage, and since we spent all that time talking about action, I'd say that also means it fits the game's focus. But we still have yet to mention the true reason MGS1 fits with action, the boss fights. I have my own thoughts about MGS1's boss fights, they're shit, but let's focus on how they make the action in the game stand out. For one, aside from Vulcan Raven, who's the only good boss by the way, none of the bosses allow you to remain in stealth. You're in shootouts, tank battles, and even fistfights. Hey, how'd this footage get here? All with the music blaring to let you know that Macho Man Snake can't be defeated in combat. So yeah, MGS1 definitely likes its action. Overall, while MGS1 misses the mark a bit with the tactics, it fits pretty well for the other two. But as we move on to the next game, I have to admit that I was a little bit surprised. Even though MGS2 isn't as good as 1, I have to admit that 2 does a way better job at fitting the whole tagline. Right off the bat, the absolute biggest thing MGS2 has in its favor is the trank gun and putting enemies to sleep in general. With the addition of first-person aiming, skill shots become more important than ever, as a well-placed trank shot will reward you with the long-range instant gratification that only choking out could supply in MGS1. But this also means more cleanup duty in MGS1 to balance this. No more disappearing bodies once they've been dealt with. You've got to make a decision that will influence how you act throughout the rest of the entire room. Do you put the enemy to sleep and risk them waking up or getting woken up? Or do you kill them and hope no one discovers the evidence, putting you into an instant caution phase? Or do you not even consider the caution phase since you can shoot radios and prevent them from calling anything at all? Already MGS2 is up in terms of tactics. Now whether or not these tactics are worth anything given MGS2's questionable quality is a different conversation. But again, that's not really the goal of this video. For espionage, MGS2 is yet again a step up. Ride and can, hide in lockers, hang off ledges, shoot steam pipes, cause long-range distractions, move slowly to make less noise, hold up soldiers, or do this. And the guards themselves also receive a huge buff. Remember when the most advanced MGS1 guards could follow footprints? Well, now these motherfuckers can flank you, stay back and wait for backup, or clear rooms looking for Raiden like a goddamn SWAT team. Now, whether or not the game makes good use of these mechanics is, you know. But MGS2 is a step up in espionage mechanics as well. And finally, the action. The straightforward combat is improved from MGS1 with the addition of first-person aiming, but it's still pretty lackluster since you can't move and aim at the same time. The combat in general is probably the thing that sees the least of a clear improvement or difference over MGS1. Unless you're going for a non-lethal playthrough, which is entirely dictated by player choice, the gunplay serves mostly the same function. But again, the boss battles are where things truly become clear. Unfortunately, Metal Gear is 0 for 2 on boss quality, but that's not really what we're here for. Just like the first game, bosses don't allow you to remain in stealth and are all about taking down your opponent through what's supposed to be blood-pumping combat. Except for Fortune, you don't get to fight her. Why is she in this fucking game? MGS2 is a great leap forward in both tactics and espionage, and keeps the pace of combat, so I have no problem saying it fits the tagline well, even better than MGS1. When moving to MGS3 though, the games don't have the benefit of jumping an entire console generation, so we'll see how much MGS3 manages to improve with what it has. Metal Gear being set in the wilderness may not sound like a huge departure to some, but really put the previous two games into perspective. Firstly, they're both set almost entirely in buildings, which means hallways, solid colors, hard floors, objects to hide in, and lots of corners. Rarely would any enemy ever be able to sneak up on you in MGS1 or 2, and very rarely would you ever approach an enemy without knowing they were in front of you. Situations like that oddly lone guard on Rex's platform come once in a blue moon, and even that was only surprising because of the limited camera. MGS3, subsistence. Completely threw all that shit out by being set in the jungle. As soon as the first few minutes of gameplay, okay, the actual gameplay, you're already being met with enemies that blend into the environment and move slowly. If you don't keep your eyes open, they'll seem like they're coming out of nowhere. But even if this happened in the last two games, you always had your radar handy to keep you aware of your surroundings. But the setting of MGS3 ain't the far-flung future of 2005. We're going back to the 60s, bitch, and in the words of GGGG, there's no radar and all of your equipment sucks. The setting so clearly defines what MGS3 is about, the tactical espionage. The gameplay is much slower than the previous two, having to slowly make your way through the jungle and carefully take out enemies that you might not see clearly at first, which you have to think far more about since you don't have as much gear to help you out. Your motion detector can act like a pseudo-radar, but will only tell you if an enemy is moving and where that is relative to where you're looking. Snake's also got stamina now, so you've constantly got to keep your bar up by continuously collecting animals and rations to eat, which adds another tactical element to the moment-to-moment gameplay. But food isn't the only thing to look out for, as suppressors now have durability, so you've got to keep your stock up and aim well if you want to remain stealthy. Hell, this is such a good gameplay addition to the series, Kojima kept it for MGS4 even though the explanation of "it's the 60s" no longer applies. And trust me, we'll get to that. And more on the stealth side, camo has finally entered the fray. And it kinda sucks dick. Sure, it adds an element to the stealth that's more than just, are you in sight range? If yes, then alert phase, but it also isn't much more than a number that tells you how far that sight range varies. So while yes, that's a point for espionage, it's a very reluctant one. Unfortunately, MGS3 follows in 2's footsteps for not really stepping up the action at all, but unlike 2, it serves the purpose of putting more emphasis on the stealth, which has always been the most engaging part of the series. The one change to action that does exist also serves this purpose, that being the way health works. You can't recover health by just scarfing down food anymore. Now you have to let Snake heal naturally, and the only way to let him do that is to keep his stamina high and keep his injuries in check. Before you play MGS3, make sure you get a medical degree since you'll be spending a decent amount of time fucking around in the menu making sure you apply all the right items to Snake's injuries. Since this system is tedious, stupid, and frankly a waste of development time since you'll never run out of meds, you are very much incentivized to stay out of combat. However, MGS3 has finally managed to do what the previous two could not: have good boss fights. No longer are our bosses confined to the walls of the action parts of these games, you know, the least fleshed out parts every time. The Ocelot unit, Joy, Fury, and of course the End all include elements of stealth in their boss fights, both on Snake's part and the enemies. I didn't think this tactical espionage action series would have such a hard time combining those concepts until now, but hey, third time's a charm. As things stand, the MGS games are on a constant incline in terms of tactics, espionage, and action. Really the only thing getting left behind in terms of advancements is the action, but MGS3's bosses are already an improvement by combining action with the other parts of the game, so all MGS4 needs to do is continue the trend, or at the very least make minor improvements. So let's see what you got for me, Kojima. Oh. So there's a story that goes around that Kojima wanted to end Metal Gear after 3, maybe even earlier, and that 4 was kinda pushed out the way it was because Kojima wanted to wrap things up and wipe this meme from the face of the earth. I have no idea if this is true, and I don't care to check, because it's not really important to what we're talking about today. I just felt the need to bring it up to say that I'm glad this wasn't the end of the MGS series, because if it was, this would be an insanely embarrassing note to go out on. Let's get the obvious out of the way first. Remember how you had to be tactical when finding equipment in the previous Metal Gears? Well, now every single thing you need, or is even just sort of useful, is now either given to you by the game or bought from the fucking store. What kind of alien universe did we land in to be buying weapons in an MGS game? You shut your fucking mouth and wait your turn. And I don't want to hear any bullshit about how it's accurate to the world building, because A, MGS2 didn't seem to have this problem, and B, you know what was supposed to be lore accurate to MGS? Suppressors being limited due to the time period. But mysteriously, they seem to be the same in MGS4, which takes place 50 years later. You know, after this game. It's almost like good gameplay matters most in a video game. Who would have thought? Not like that applies to MGS4 anyway, since suppressors are another thing you can buy, removing the tactical aspect that made limiting them meaningful in the first place. The stamina system returns with very few changes. It's a little more difficult to maintain and restore stamina now thanks to the sight gauging of almost all your recovery items, but I rarely ever actually got the stamina bar to affect my gameplay, so the jury's still out on how much it actually matters, especially in the face of a lot of the bigger aspects of the game. This is also where I would describe the sight gauge, but calling it a gameplay mechanic would be ascribing credit that it really doesn't deserve. Stealth has also taken a huge hit due to 2 new additions, Crouch Movement and Octo Camo. The duality of movement in MGS has always been that walking is faster and better for combat, but loud enough for enemies to hear you, while crawling is silent and stealthy, but slow and risky if you end up getting caught. MGS4 decided it was best to introduce a third option, crouch walking. Crouch walking is way quieter than walking normally, it's lower to the ground so you can hide behind cover, it's way faster than crawling, and you can aim while moving. Crawling still has a slight edge when it comes to stealth, but walking has been completely obliterated in terms of usefulness in MGS4. The only thing it has over crouch walking is speed, but not by much. I barely even noticed the difference in speed during all my time playing the game. CQC isn't even affected by crouching since going between stances was also made easier, so you can crouch walk right up to someone and then combo straight into CQC no problem. But you know, even minus crouch walking, Octo Camo is still a damning feature of MGS4. Now I'll be the first to admit that the camo system in MGS3 was half-baked to say the least, but like I said before, I'd still offer that as a point towards espionage because it's a mechanic that will drastically alter the experience if it isn't paid enough attention. MGS4 decided to use a very strange solution to this problem. Now, instead of changing your camo manually, it automatically applies from whatever surface you're touching. This is definitely more convenient than MGS3's system, but now we have the problem of the system being redundant. Why does camo matter at all if it's going to be applied automatically? Remember in my Doom video, always advertise, when I called stone imps a circular solution? As a reminder, the idea is that if you're faced with a game design problem, the solution isn't to introduce a new gameplay element that makes the problem redundant, it's to just get rid of the problem. Instead of just abolishing camo, MGS4 keeps the system in a redundant form. But even that's not entirely true, since MGS4 actually makes the system worse. In MGS3, getting the camo index above like 80 was actually pretty tough. Obtaining a lot of the camos meant you had to go out of your way, and some of the strongest pieces of camo actually came with trade-offs, almost like this is a video game where you make choices or something. But in MGS4, because it's all automatic, as soon as you unlock face camo, you gain the ability to have a motherfucking 99 in the camo index. Unfortunately, a 99 is just as bad as it sounds. Luckily, it's only available when prone, but the fact that it can get that high at all with such ease is evidence of a problem. And finally, the action. Against all odds, MGS4 managed to pull one ahead this time and have a better focus on action. Whether or not this was in service to the game's quality is a different conversation. For once, MGS has good shooting controls. Almost. You were this close, Kojima. There isn't really much else to say about the action, but the fact that shooting is more streamlined kinda says it all. This is the MGS game where fighting is the least difficult and cumbersome, but also the most present. There isn't even much to say in terms of bosses either, since there are so few of them. Laughing Octopus does take a page from MGS3 and include reverse stealth mechanics though, so that's nice to see. I'd love it if the game took a few more pages from MGS3, since comparing 4 to 3 is like comparing The Day My Butt Went Psycho to Lord of the Rings. I will say one place MGS4 could have used a bigger focus on action is in the cutscenes. Okay, no, I can't. As much as I want to talk about MGS4's story, I absolutely cannot. Not only is this not the time or place, there's simply too much to talk about.
Hold on to me.
Fuck. You know, when I first set out to make this video, it wasn't supposed to be a critique. I wanted something a little bit more laid back after the Doom video, but leave it to a game like MGS4 to pull me right back into critic mode. Maybe I should make a PSA about bad games. All I wanted to do was make a video about MGS's funny little tagline, but now we're here. Alright, let's get it over with. Time to find out how well MGS5 fits tactical espionage. Fuck. Okay, so you could probably tell this topic was off from the start, since MGS5 doesn't even really use the tagline of the series, instead adopting Peace Walker's operations part of it. This is because instead of Metal Gear's previous use of linear story-based progression, MGS5 uses the individual mission structure from the portable titles. For the millionth time, I have to remind myself this video isn't supposed to be a critique, but outlining the fact that operations is a pretty integral part of the title now is unfortunately going to lead us to the tagline as a whole and why MGS5 suffers for it. And yes, it's called MGS5, anyone who calls it V is too pretentious to be kept alive. And the suffering begins immediately with the tactics. Just like MGS4, we're not procuring on site anymore. Everything you might need for your missions is something you'll have going into them through MGS5's equipment system, most items being exclusively available through this system. Now, this doesn't inherently make MGS5 non-tactical. If the game had some sort of risk-reward system when choosing what tools to bring with you, that would be a completely new angle for MGS to hit tactics from. However, MGS5 makes use of the dominant strategy school of game design. Whenever you go out for a mission in MGS5, do you ever not take a silenced weapon with you? This applies both to Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain, but far more so for Pain. In Zeroes, you're almost always given a silenced pistol to begin with, but maintaining your ammo is how the system remains tactical, either interrogating or exploring to find more ammo, or memorizing ammo positions on replays. In Pain, you bring the pistol in with your loadout, and you can order resupplies on your iPhone. If you ever need something you don't have in Pain, you buy it. and then you wait 3.5 hours. Hell, most of your time in the game is probably going to be spent thinking,
We've got to have money.
Sure, you could choose not to use these things, but at that point you could say that for any criticism of any game. Pain gives the player far more freedom than any MGS game previous, but this results in a system that heavily rewards using the dominant strategy, since there's not really any punishment for being unprepared or bringing suboptimal gear. Pain has money and resource requirements for these things, but those aren't at all tied to how well you play the game. You need money, grind side ops and FOBs. You need resources, grind the open world and FOBs. You need soldiers, grind the open world and FOBs. Okay, the online functionality of MGS5 is a whole other can of worms, to the point where I just won't include it. But the point is that MGS5 doesn't reward tactical planning in any other way than self-satisfaction. So to say that MGS5 is a tactical game is absolutely loaded with asterisks. The operations mission structure heavily impacts how gear works in the game, and there simply wasn't enough care put into how the system supports, or rather doesn't support, the tactical gameplay. Could you tell I feel very conflicted about MGS5? We'll get used to it, because it's going to continue into Espionage. Luckily, stealth in MGS5 is a lot less ambiguous in terms of whether or not it fits, and isn't affected by operations nearly as much as the tactics are. 5 still puts emphasis on stealth, even if it doesn't have that great of a long-term benefit. The biggest change is the addition of marking. Even MGS3 has substitutes for the radar, but 5 relies almost entirely on the camera to keep track of enemies. Now, when you look at an enemy close enough, they're permanently marked, which means you can see them through walls and whether they're active or not. Despite the conveniences offered by the radar, marking is more useful by a long shot. Pay close enough attention to it and you'll never have to worry about any guard in your vicinity. While this does make stealth a lot easier, it also lets the player know that stealth is something to focus on, since marking enemies allows you to be aware of your surroundings without taking your eyes off of what's in front of you. Another big focus for stealth is the day-night cycle. Obviously, Snake is far easier to see during the day than he is at night. Unfortunately, Pain makes it far too easy to abuse this system, since both the command center and phantom cigars allow you to choose whenever you take on an enemy encampment. They try to alleviate this by giving some guards night vision goggles, but it's still better to have some guards be able to see you well than all of them being able to. This is another point where Zeros did it better, since the time of day was linked to the mission. Guards once again receive a pretty substantial upgrade, and are more persistent than ever when they go looking for you. Going into all the specifics of guards in MGS5 would take a while, so let's just leave it at they're way more advanced than ever before. Stealth on Snake's side is where things get a little bit more tricky. Of course, crouch movement returns, and yet again there's no reason to ever stand rather than crouch. Hell, even crouching sees less use now, since crawling has the additional ability to roll, taking away the negative that crawling is slow. Snake's wider range of possibilities allows for a lot, and we haven't even talked about gear yet. Zeros and Pain both start you out with night vision goggles that have great visibility at night and outline enemies even during the day, and Snake now carries an infinite supply of noisemakers on him at all times. And now that Snake can Fulton enemies away, any unconscious bodies in the camp are rarely at risk of being discovered. Those are all things the game gives you automatically, never mind any of the upgrades you can get for them. 5 is the MGS game that puts the biggest focus on perfect stealth, to the point where it's a bonus in almost every mission, but that stealth is a little bit too easy to both attain and maintain. Speaking of, yeah, reflex mode is kinda busted. The second an enemy sees you, headshotting them with a tranq dart is extremely easy, and doing so doesn't break stealth. And as much as I want to call that a point against stealth, this is also the MGS game where enemy sight is the most ambiguous it's ever been, so there will be many a time where you get seen in a situation that really doesn't seem to get your work out that way. I would then call it a criticism of the game to even be designed with reflex mode in mind, but that's veering a little bit too far out of this video's scope. And for the last time, we talk about the action. I know that Operations is in the title, but obviously no one here is going to argue that MGS5 wouldn't still fit the old tagline, so we're keeping things consistent. Like MGS4, 5 has streamlined the controls to the point where 5 controls like the average third-person shooter. Snake controls better than ever, which does wonders for the action gameplay. What doesn't work for action, however, is Snake's health. Snake now has a regenerating health bar like in a lot of cover shooters, which means that slipping out of fights and into stealth works better now, but that's obviously taking emphasis away from the action. But unlike 3, this emphasis isn't going towards stealth, it's just evaporating. Unfortunately, MGS5's content doesn't quite match well with its mechanics. It only applies in select cases for both Zeros and Pain, but Pain makes it well known just how much direct action can suck in missions like a quiet exit or any of the times you fight skulls. And speaking of direct action, we have even less bosses in Pain, with only 4 to count. Quiet, the Man on Fire, and 2 for Sahelanthropus. Quiet is the only one who's engaged with stealth and action. Kinda. She always seems to have a pretty good idea of where you are, but since you spend a lot of this fight hiding, I'll say it has elements of both. Sally 1 is basically entirely stealth, so action doesn't really apply here. Burning Man and Sally 2 are both direct action fights, and they both kinda suck, but what are you gonna do? I feel no need to talk about Operations specifically since it's pretty self-explanatory, except for one thing. An argument I could hear for the pros of the Operations structure is that it supports tactical planning by allowing you to go into missions knowing what to expect. This is a fair point. A lot of tactics is being able to plan ahead, and knowing how to annihilate a mission for the best score is a part of this. However, this only applies to replays. The fact of the matter is that MGS5's main story can be completed without ever having to replay a mission, and the only thing we're talking about today is the main content of the games. So even though I could give that to MGS5, it simply isn't congruent with how I've judged the other games. Instead, operations will be our wrap-up for MGS5, since like I said, it's a pretty fundamental part of where this game places its focus. We already talked about it for tactics, but you have to understand this applies a domino effect to the others. Because the tactics are weak, the espionage ends up being far too easy, even though emphasis is placed on it. And since the mission structure allows for missions to be easily restartable, the consequences of action are far less pronounced than they've ever been. Overall, MGS5 really shits the bed when it comes to fitting with the rest of the series, which anyone who's played the game could have already told you. Was there any point to this? Probably not. This started out as a random thought I had that I thought would make a really cool video idea. Maybe I let my criticisms of the game slip too much. Maybe I didn't explain enough of what I meant by tactics, espionage, and action. And maybe that's fine. Unlike the Doom video, this isn't supposed to be some takedown of MGS where I make a bunch of arguments to make a definitive statement about the games. Maybe it's okay if I'm wrong on this one. I'll admit, in terms of all the little secrets and strategies in the MGS series, I know of only a few of them, and I've actually used even less. So if there's any aspects of the games you think I missed out on and should have mentioned, feel free to comment below on any or all of them. I plan on replaying every game when the Master Collection comes out, so mixing up my gameplay next time will be fun. Revisiting this video topic after I replay the trilogy might make a greater product overall. Or maybe I just get Ravage in the comments. Feel free to tell me why I'm wrong, just like the video if you got this wrong. Okay, bye.